Red Bull just crossed a line the FIA never expected, and the consequences could rip through the entire 2026 season. What if the fastest team on the grid has been building an engine so controversial, it triggered a secret investigation before the first lap? In the next few minutes, we'll break down the leaked data, the loophole Red Bull thought no one would catch, and the political storm erupting inside Formula One. Because if this gray area leads to sanctions or worse, Red Bull's dominance might not just end, it might be erased from the history books. Red Bull Powertrains was supposed to be their next evolutionary leap, the moment when the team stopped relying on external suppliers and took complete control of their championship future. With the departure of Honda and the historic collaboration with Ford, the 2026 engine program became the centerpiece of Red Bull's long-term dominance strategy. But now, that same program is under direct threat. The FIA has launched a formal investigation into what it calls a regulatory gray area within the RB Ford 2026 power unit. Insiders suggest this isn't just a minor discrepancy, this is a systemic concern around how energy recovery, storage, and deployment have been structured in ways that may undermine the very spirit of the new hybrid regulations. At the core of the controversy is Red Bull's advanced electrical deployment system, specifically, the interaction between the MGUK, the energy store, and how the power is redistributed during qualifying and race stints. The 2026 regulations are built on balance, a 50-50 power split between combustion and electric sources, a simplified turbo architecture, and tightly capped energy flow rates. But according to whistleblowers close to the investigation, Red Bull's architecture may be exploiting timing windows and energy release delays to deliver performance peaks that rival teams simply can't match. The data suggests Red Bull found a way to stack torque delivery in legal microbursts, something that's incredibly hard to detect unless you know exactly what to look for. And that's exactly how the FIA got involved. During a recent closed-door compliance review, anomalies were flagged in Red Bull's simulation data, anomalies that didn't match the expected performance ceilings under standard FIA benchmarking protocols. Initially brushed off as calibration variance, repeated patterns in deployment maps forced a second look. That second look became a full-blown inquiry. Red Bull insists they've operated within the letter of the law. But the FIA isn't just asking about rules anymore, they're questioning intent. Did Red Bull deliberately build an architecture that skirts the definition of fairness, or did they simply find an unanticipated advantage the rules failed to predict? That question has sparked outrage across the paddock. Ferrari has demanded clarity on what constitutes legal versus legal but unethical performance gains. Mercedes has already submitted a list of technical queries, asking the FIA to publish a formal clarification before any power unit homologation takes place. And Audi, set to enter in 2026, has reportedly paused key aspects of its own ERS development until this issue is resolved. In other words, this isn't just about Red Bull anymore. It's about the entire 2026 playing field. And that means political pressure is rising fast, especially as teams push for answers before they lock in their final power unit blueprints. Behind the scenes, Red Bull's engineering team is facing a brutal dilemma. If they abandon the current system under FIA pressure, they risk losing the competitive edge they've spent 2 years perfecting. If they stand their ground and the FIA rules against them, they could be forced into emergency redesigns with minimal testing time. Worse still, if the investigation leads to any form of sanctions like delayed homologation, forced component changes, or restricted deployment modes, the 2026 car could start the season fundamentally compromised. And that would mean Red Bull, the reigning powerhouse, could enter the next regulation era with a performance handicap no amount of aerodynamics can fix. But perhaps the most dangerous consequence is reputational. Red Bull has built its modern empire on bold innovation, fearless engineering, and high-risk, high-reward strategies. But if they are now labeled as a team that crossed ethical boundaries, especially in a sustainability-driven era, it could damage their standing with sponsors, fans, and governing bodies alike. Ford, in particular, may find itself in a difficult position. Their corporate ethos is built on transparency, performance, and innovation, but not controversy. If the perception grows that Ford has been dragged into a regulatory storm because of Red Bull's aggressive tactics, the alliance may be strained at its foundation. So the question that now echoes through every F1 boardroom, simulator room, and FIA technical office is simple but devastating: did Red Bull go too far? Or did they just expose a fundamental flaw in the 2026 rulebook that no one was prepared to face? Either answer is explosive. And as the investigation unfolds, the answers might not just rewrite Red Bull's future, they might rewrite the very structure of Formula One's next generation. Max Verstappen's role in this controversy cannot be overstated. While Red Bull engineers face the technical firestorm, Verstappen is grappling with the uncertainty of whether his 2026 campaign is already compromised before a single lap is run. Sources inside the camp have indicated that Max has personally requested a full briefing on the FIA's findings and potential implications. Why? Because his entire driving philosophy is built around predictability, throttle fidelity, and confidence under braking. If the power unit's deployment characteristics, particularly during low-speed acceleration and energy recovery, must be altered, it changes how he drives. That may sound subtle to a casual viewer, but for a world champion operating at the edge, it could mean the difference between pole position and P5. Behind closed doors, the Verstappen camp is growing wary. There's a deep understanding that Red Bull's competitive advantage in recent years hasn't come just from aero, it came from perfect engine-chassis integration. The 2026 car will demand an even tighter relationship between energy control and vehicle dynamics. If the FIA forces Red Bull to rewrite key components of its hybrid strategy, it could create a cascade of secondary changes: gear ratios, chassis balance, even cooling flow. And while other teams are already refining their platforms under a stable regulatory interpretation, Red Bull could find itself rebuilding under a cloud of suspicion. For Verstappen, that's not just frustrating, it's unacceptable. Meanwhile, the political war inside the paddock is entering a new phase. Mercedes and Ferrari have quietly launched an information campaign behind the scenes, urging the FIA to issue a preemptive clarification before Red Bull's system can become a template for others. Their argument is strategic. If Red Bull's power deployment system is found legal but left unaddressed, it forces every other manufacturer to abandon their current designs and mimic Red Bull's controversial architecture, potentially costing millions and invalidating years of research. This is no longer a dispute about one engine. It's about protecting competitive fairness across the entire grid. But that creates a trap. If the FIA acts too aggressively, they risk penalizing innovation and setting a precedent that technical ingenuity is punishable if it becomes too successful. On the other hand, if they do nothing, they send a message that bending the rules as long as it fits within vague regulatory lines is not only acceptable, but smart. This is the tightrope F1's governing body now walks. And it may be the most high-stakes regulatory decision since the 2009 double diffuser saga or even the 2021 cost cap controversy. Except this time, the battleground is invisible. It lives in the software code, not on the surface of the car. Another layer to this crisis is the Ford partnership. While Ford executives have publicly maintained their support for the Red Bull project, privately, the mood is far more cautious. Ford's return to F1 is supposed to be a statement of high-tech engineering, global brand relevance, and sustainability leadership. If their name becomes associated with a controversial legal cheat code, they risk alienating the very audience they're trying to capture. Already, some senior Ford engineers have begun asking for separate audits of the deployment systems, seeking guarantees that their technology isn't at risk of reputational damage. If this relationship fractures, it would not just hurt Red Bull's credibility, it would threaten their entire engine program. And then there's the timing. Red Bull has been meticulously planning its 2026 transition. They've recruited top-tier engineers, invested heavily in dyno infrastructure, and prioritized integration testing across all divisions. The FIA investigation throws all of that into jeopardy. Development timelines could be frozen. Testing schedules might be delayed. And the psychological toll on staff engineers, drivers, and management alike could be devastating. In a sport where milliseconds matter, losing development time means losing performance. And when the reset button of 2026 is hit, whoever starts behind might never catch up. Ultimately, what we're witnessing isn't just a dispute over kilojoules or voltage curves, it's a fundamental test of Formula One's regulatory philosophy. Can a team be punished for being too clever? Should innovation be curbed if it outpaces understanding? And what happens when one team's genius becomes everyone else's nightmare? These aren't just questions for the FIA. They're questions for fans, stakeholders, and every constructor preparing for the sport's next era. The investigation into Red Bull's 2026 engine isn't just about rules. It's about what kind of sport Formula One wants to be.